retreat across New Jersey, which tells you that we're trying very hard to live to fight another day, right? Okay, where's Washington at this point? White Plains, New York, correct? And what he wants to do is he wants to get in a position where he can survive, because by late October of 1776, Washington's position's a little bit desperate. Have they won a battle yet? No. All they've been doing is being on the run, basically. Have they suffered some losses in soldiers and supplies from the time they got to New York to get on Manhattan? Sure they have. Okay? So they're not in great shape. Now, even some of these members of the Army that were on a volunteer basis, since they were seeing nothing but defeat, they picked up their guns and returned home. So of the 19,000 soldiers he has, he is continuing to lose those along the way. So at this point, General Washington decides that he's going to retreat across New Jersey into Pennsylvania.
By the way, New Jersey is the home of the New Jersey Devils. Remember that.
All right, there you go. Now, listen to this carefully. Once they get into Pennsylvania, there's going to be something that will separate them from the British and give General Washington time to regroup. And that something that's going to separate him from the British is the Delaware River. Okay? So, by late October of 1776, Washington's position is becoming somewhat desperate. Winter is approaching. He's lost soldiers and supplies during his campaign thus far, and some members of the Army who are seeing certain defeat are picking up their guns and returning to their homes. And at this point, Washington decides to retreat across New Jersey into Pennsylvania. Now, why are these guys being able to get up and leave? Because their enlistments are what? It's 1 year and they're expiring, okay? And some are volunteers. Now, during this retreat across New Jersey, Washington continues to lose soldiers. And by the time he gets on the Pennsylvania side of New Jersey, which means he's still where? In New Jersey. Guess how many soldiers he has, Jaden, of the 19,000 he started with?
8,000.
Close, but not right. Even less. 2,400. So he has lost all of those men during the retreat across New Jersey. So during the retreat across New Jersey, soldiers continue to slip away from the Army, and by the time Washington reaches the Pennsylvania side of New Jersey, he's only got about 2,400 troops remaining with the Continental Army. Now, Washington's thinking at this time, if we're going to stay in the Revolutionary War, if we're going to survive, we need to, and you've heard this statement before, you athletes, we need to go big or go home. So what he's doing is he's going to try to set themselves up for some sort of a military victory. Okay? So that's retreat across New Jersey. What they have done is simply retreated across New Jersey, heading for Pennsylvania where they can regroup. So let's move on to December 22nd, 1776, and we'll talk about Trenton and Princeton. Trenton and Princeton, which is your next subtopic. And it's December 22nd of 1776. Think about where Washington's at. He's lost every battle with Britain since we started, right? He lost 2,000 men retreating from where? Remember, he sent William Sterling. Where were they retreating from? What? New York. Okay? Now, he's lost 75% of his army, and he's lost every battle with the British. He only has 2,400 soldiers under his command, and some of those are still leaving because you have another enlistment year up on December 31st. This is December 22nd. He's got 2,400 soldiers. He knows he's going to lose more on the 31st because their enlistments are up. Okay? Now, on the other side of things, how are British leaders doing? How is Sir William Howe doing? How is General Charles Cornwallis doing? These British generals. Where are they right now? Where do you think they are enjoying the holiday season? Confident victory. They're in New York. Okay? And what they're doing in New York is they're preparing to celebrate the Christmas holidays. But yet they're smart enough, they want to keep an eye on Washington, the Continental Army. So what General Cornwallis does is he stations 1,400 Hessian soldiers at Trenton. And the idea is Trenton is about 10 miles away from where Washington is camped on the Pennsylvania side of New Jersey. Okay? And what Cornwallis is doing is he's taking those 1,400 Hessian soldiers and he's basically having them keep an eye on the Continental Army until what comes when they resume fighting again? Spring. Now the man that will command those 1,400 Hessians at Trenton will be a Hessian colonel by the name of Johann Rall. Johann Rall will be the Hessian colonel that will command his own troops, 1,400 Hessians, and they're going to be stationed at Trenton. General Charles Cornwallis, British General Cornwallis, orders Hessian Colonel Johann Rall and 1,400 Hessians to go to Trenton to keep an eye on Washington and the Continental Army till spring. Well, this is where another person that nobody knows in American history comes onto the scene that makes a huge difference. As Washington is sitting at his headquarters on the Pennsylvania side of New Jersey, all of a sudden he has brought a, quote, look at me, he has brought a British spy that has been captured by American soldiers. So as Washington's sitting in his headquarters, he has brought a British spy who was captured by his soldiers. And the normal procedure would be that those soldiers would bring in that British spy. Washington would set him down, maybe in handcuffs or not, and interrogate that British spy with soldiers watching for his protection. Okay? This was a little different. When they brought him this British spy, he asked the soldiers to leave them alone, that he would interrogate this British spy by himself. So instead of having him handcuffed and set him in a chair and start to interrogate him, the first thing that Washington does to this spy is he reaches out his hand and he shakes his hand. Okay? He shakes this British spy's hand. What's the name of the British spy? John Honeyman. Another man in American history who helped the American Revolution succeed that no one's heard of. John Honeyman. I'll tell you a little bit about John Honeyman. He was born in Ireland, and he joined the British Army at the age of 29. Okay? He was born in Ireland, and he joined the British Army at 29. He fought on the British side very successfully in the French and Indian War. And because of his efforts, he was given an honorable discharge. Okay? And with that honorable discharge came the trust of the British people. He was a British soldier who fought for Britain in the French and Indian War, who eventually then moved to America. Okay? So he would be viewed by British people as a loyalist. Okay? A loyalist. Well, he's obviously able to move freely between British camps, and he allows himself to be captured by these American soldiers. He allows himself to be captured. In other words, he gets captured on purpose. He and Washington have a history. He's not a British spy. What is he really? An American spy that the British believe is spying for them. They think he's a loyalist. Well, what he's been doing is he's been hanging around these British camps and getting information, and now he's been captured, and these American soldiers think he's a British spy. They arrest him legitimately and bring him to Washington. What he is an American spy. Well, Honeyman gives General Washington a bunch of information, very valuable information, and General Washington decides that he's going to go big or go home. He's got to get a victory. Now, as I mentioned, Trenton, New Jersey is about 10 miles away across the Delaware River from where the 14 Hessian soldiers are dug in for the winter at Trenton. They're about 10 miles apart. Now, remember, they're not expecting a fight over there because what's the European military tradition? No fighting in the winter. Well, basically what Honeyman tells Washington is you can win this impossible victory at Trenton, but you're going to have to be willing to break the cardinal rule of war and attack during the winter. So Honeyman gives him information, and he tells Washington, you can win this impossible victory against the Hessians because you're going to have the element of surprise, because this is what Honeyman said about those Hessians. He said, the Hessians are off their guards, half of them asleep or drunk, dreaming for Christmas. So Honeyman tells Washington, listen, these Hessians are not ready for you. They are abiding by the European tradition of war. They are off their guards, half of them are either asleep or drunk, and they're dreaming for Christmas. So what does Washington do? He plans a surprise attack on Christmas Day. Christmas Day. That is violating every cardinal rule of warfare at the time that you can believe. Okay? He plans a surprise attack on Christmas Day. Now, you've probably seen this picture in your elementary classrooms. What American troops are going to do is they're going to cross the ice-choked Delaware River, then march directly to Trenton and take on these Hessians. You ever seen the painting of Washington crossing the Delaware? This is what it's about. This is the story. Okay? Although it's a little fictional as depiction, if you look at it, it's not quite true. But anyway, we'll talk about that later. Now, Washington needs a little more help. So what he does on Christmas Eve is he sends Honeyman back to Trenton to give his British spy report to Johann Rall. In other words, Honeyman's going to go tell Rall that I've snuck into the American camp, and let me tell you how bad a shape they're in. Okay? So you see what he's doing? He's going to set him up. So on Christmas Eve, Honeyman works his way back to Trenton and is going to report on the Americans to General Johann Rall. Now again, you've got to remember that the British believe Honeyman is a loyalist spy on their side. So when he asks, that being Honeyman, to meet with Commander Rall, which would be a little unusual, the sentries, in other words, the Hessian guards that are out guarding their camp, don't have any problem letting him go in there and talk to Rall because they see him as a loyal British spy. They've seen him around. So Honeyman goes in and he meets with Colonel Rall, and he tells him, I've been to the American camp, and he gives a description, 3 descriptions of the colonial army. He says, I've been to the American camp, and the colonial army, 1, is in disarray, which isn't true, but that's what he tells him. So Honeyman gets together with Colonel Rall. He tells him he's been to the American camp, and he tells the colonel that the colonial army is 1, in disarray. 2, he tells him they're lacking materials and equipment. He tells them they're lacking materials and equipment. But the 3rd thing he tells him puts Rall off guard and has him let his guard down, and he will pay little attention to the Americans. He tells them that the American colonial army is on the verge of mutiny. They're just about to overthrow Washington and head for home. That's the 3 things he tells them. And Rall believes it. Why would he not? Okay? So again, Honeyman goes back on Christmas Eve. He meets with Colonel Johann Rall. He tells him he's been to the American camp. He says the colonial army is in disarray. The colonial army is lacking materials and equipment, and they are on the edge of mutiny. Colonel Rall is delighted at the news that Honeyman has given him, and now he's going to lower his guard even more. Okay, now a little visual here. Here is the Delaware River. Okay? Here is Trenton. Here is Washington's. Here's Washington's camp. Okay? Washington splits up his army into 3 separate sections. Washington takes 2,400 soldiers, and he was going to cross the Delaware across from his camp. Okay? He's going to send 700 more soldiers, because he's accumulated a few more, to cross the Delaware right straight across from Trenton. Then he's going to send 1,500 militiamen who have come to join him downriver and cross the Delaware. So he's going to cross the Delaware in 3 different locations. He's going to cross straight across from their camp into this part of New Jersey with 2,400 men. He's going to send 700 men under other command to march across the river right towards Trenton, and 1,500 downriver. Okay? Now, basically, he's got 2,400 and 1,500 is 3,900 and 700 is about 4,600 men, right? Against how many Hessians? 1,400. Now, here's the key though. Because this is a sneak attack, what time is he? Did I tell you what time he started? No. I didn't. Okay? He plans this and he initiates it at 4 o'clock on Christmas Day, p.m. 4 o'clock p.m. on Christmas Day is when they begin to cross the river. Washington and 2,400 straight across in their camp, 700 other Colonial Army soldiers right straight across the river towards Trenton, and 1,500 militia downriver. Now they've got to get across the river, which is ice-choked and difficult to cross, by midnight. Why they got to be across the river by midnight? No, they won't be drunk. No, these guys might be drunk. But why does he have to get across the river by midnight? That's right, because what's going to happen in the morning? Light's going to come, and the element of surprise is gone. Okay? So he's telling his men, we got to get across the Delaware. This isn't like going across the Bighorn down here. It's a big river. You got to get across it by midnight, and it's ice-choked. It's difficult to travel. But he tells those 3 prongs, we have got to start, and we've got to get across by midnight, so we have enough time to march to Trenton before dawn, so we have the element of surprise. If you're going to be late, it's going to be history. It's not going to work. Well, by the time General Washington and his men complete the trip across the Delaware River, he's got a couple of pieces of bad news. First of all, by the time he gets across, it's 4 o'clock in the morning. So they are 4 hours late. That's the first bit of bad news. They're 4 hours late. They don't get across the Delaware until 4 in the morning. On top of that, these 2 sections never make it across. So he's sitting there with 2,400 men. And he's got to make a decision. What's the decision he's going to have to make? Julie? It's a quote. He's going to have to make the decision to go big or go home. In other words, he's either going to continue on with the plan and attack, or he's going to fear defeat and go back across the river and wait for another day. Those are the choices he has. Go big or go home. Well, he makes the choice to go big and not go home. Go big and not go home. But as soon as they make that decision, they run into trouble right away. As soon as they make the decision, they run into trouble. What would be the trouble that they might have as soon as they got across the river? What would be some trouble they could have? Now all the Hessians are back enjoying Christmas. Drunked up, whatever. So what trouble? What might happen that might get them in trouble? What's that?
Weather.
No, good guess.
The church.
Do you think that these guys that are drunked up and the commanders that are having a good time, do you think they're dumb enough not to send out guards to look? Well, what happened is a loyalist spy watched them come across the river. So what's he going to do? He's going to ride back to Trenton and try to talk to Colonel Rahl and say, hey, the American Continental Army has crossed the Delaware and they're on their way to Trenton. Now evidently this British spy didn't have the moxie or the trust that John Honeyman had, because the sentries that were guarding Trenton, guarding the camp, would not allow him to go talk directly to Rahl. For a couple of reasons. Maybe he didn't have the moxie, but what was Rahl doing? having a good time. And the sentries thought, well, he doesn't want to be bothered by this guy here. And so they said, you write down what you want to tell him, and we'll deliver it to him. So they don't let him go talk directly to Colonel Rahl. They make this British loyalist spy write down the message and say they will take the message to him. Do they deliver the message?
No.
Actually, they do. But Rahl is having such a good time visiting and partying or whatever he's doing. The British sentry hands him the message, and he just kind of keeps on talking and sticks it in his pocket, never taking it out and reading it. Just put it in his pocket. Well, the following morning, not the following morning, the morning, which day would this be, by the way? No, because they left at 4 o'clock. December 26th, the day after Christmas, Washington and his men attacked Trenton. These Hessians are caught completely off guard, and Johann Rahl is among the first to die in the American attack, with the note in his pocket. Okay? So, the morning after Christmas, General Washington and his men attack Trenton, and the Hessians are caught completely off guard. Colonel Rahl is among the first to die in this American attack, and all the Hessian soldiers that survived the battle are captured. Now, do you think word got back to the British in New York City this was happening? Certainly did. On January 2nd of 1777, General Cornwallis rushes reinforcements to Trenton. And once they get there, they make the plan to attack the Continental Army the next morning. So British officers